Hi everyone, and welcome to today's Red Hat webinar. Before we get started with today's presentation, there are a few items to quickly mention. You should see a taskbar at the bottom of the screen. Each icon is assigned to a particular element of today's webinar. If you're not sure what the icon does, hover over the icon with your mouse and the box will appear to tell you the function. Also, next to the slides window, you should see a blank Ask a Question box that allows you to type a question. After you type the question, click Submit to send it to our presenters. Feel free to submit your questions throughout the webinar, and our presenters will address as many as possible following the presentation. You can submit any technical questions related to the webinar platform here. Please close down other browser windows or applications that might be splitting your bandwidth, including VPNs, as these might interfere with the audio or video stream. If you experience any connectivity issues, please refresh your browser. Today's session is being recorded, and all registrants will receive an email within 1 to 2 days of the event with a link to view this presentation on demand. Now I'm going to hand it over to today's first speaker so we can get started with the presentation.
Hey, everybody, this is John Willis from Red Hat. For those who've been following the series, this is actually our fourth in the series of, I think we loosely called sort of DevOps Game, or the idea was to emulate some of the characters in the Phoenix project, and what would the conversations look like 10 years forward as in now. So today, I will be playing Erik Reid. My good friend Kevin Behr will be playing Bill Palmer, and I'm really excited to one of my favorite people of all time, Shannon Leach, will be playing Sarah Moulton. So let's and Sarah, we'll let her explain her sort of bio when she started, but we've sort of moved things around. She's now sort of all other things, plus she's a CISO. Or something like that. So anyway, and we're just kind of having fun. So all right, curtain draws. Bill, good talking to you again. We talked to Brent last time, and we had talked about how his take on all this cloud work and how it sort of got us back into bottlenecks. And I think he helped us. And I think at the end of our conversation, we realized, I wonder what Sarah's doing over in security, because she must have these incredible pain points as well. And I wonder if we should just sort of get her on a call and see what is this cloud first and sort of frantic move to cloud, and does the cloud by default make everything perfect and better for security?
Yeah. That's actually awesome, because actually you're the next on my list, Sarah, to come visit and talk about this. I actually, believe it or not, invited Brent and Patty. Both were hard declines immediately, not because of the subject matter, but because apparently there's some sort of all hands meeting, and apparently somehow the green shifting wasn't working anymore, and we've got some behinds on the project plan. So I think a lot of people are screaming about resources, and I get more worried that when we're working like this, what we're not thinking about and what we're not doing. And so I kind of worry about mindset. And so, Sarah, I think this would be a really great opportunity maybe for us to kind of ring fence what we see happening here, and maybe just talk a little bit about how we want to behave and how we want to be and what you're seeing. Because I get worried when people start running around, with heads cut off or not. I feel like there's just too much activity and too much of a buzz, and people are confused. And that smells like bad things to me could happen.
Oh, absolutely. It's so nice to see you folks again. It's been quite some time.
Time.
I mean, it wasn't exactly parting in the best of circumstances, as we all remember. But we've all grown a lot, and it was an interesting time to go through what we did. I mean, if you look back, a tremendous amount of growth in all of us at this point, myself included. I think I really learned a lot, and coming from the retail side and really thinking about what my next part of the journey was going to be, it was an epiphany for me. I mean, at the time I was unmarried, and, essentially my whole life was in the business, and my whole life was about the customer. And really, I think that may have been taken the wrong way. I'm super customer oriented. I wanted the best for our customers. I wanted our business to thrive because I really had believed in it. And and I think about now, 10 years later, it's an interesting growth path, because when I walked out of Parts Unlimited and I, essentially left the Phoenix project, I think there was just a big understanding that something else was missing, and that I wasn't actually getting things. I wasn't really understanding this whole digital transformation thing, and really what it took, and how companies had evolved at the time. And so it gave me a pause, right? Going back and thinking about specifically what were we all trying to accomplish. And I had some time to think about it, obviously. I had moved on, and the question in my mind at the time was retail or not again, and would I want to continue, and what was my path, what was my journey, what was I excited about? And honestly, because it was such a big change and it was such a big problem at the end there, I kind of sat back and thought about what everybody was talking about, and really what did the world need, and what was going to be something that I could contribute to. And knowing that I love the customer and being customer dedicated, wanting to ensure things are designed for delight, I think I really understood that we had problems around IT and security in a different way. And so I actually went back and got retrained, not just from having an MBA and trying to understand business. The question was, do I want to be a CEO, or do I have something more valuable to offer the industry?
Besides making it work.
I realized, and so what a big epiphany for me was that we were trying to put security and DevOps and all of these things together. And so the big epiphany for me, 10 years ago, was maybe it's not right yet. And so you can imagine, I've been on the forefront of DevSecOps. I've been on the forefront of really helping the industry to evolve. And having been a business owner, and before I had gone to Parts, and then understanding retail, my desire was always to solve for the customer first, but it really got taken out of proportion. And I think this notion of digital transformation, the industry is still sort of struggling with it. I think even with these times, COVID, I mean, we're all sitting in our homes at this point talking over, digital. Otherwise, we'd be sitting around a bar having a drink, right? Well, maybe. I don't know. You guys weren't exactly in love with me at the time. But I do think that over the 10 years, we did
talk about you while drinking.
I'm sure you did. I mean, I actually talked about myself while drinking, so let's be honest, right? It was a big epiphany when Steve really told me I wasn't getting it right. And I thought, look, I'm trying to represent the company and the customer, and I've got it right. And I'm really trying to represent that top level. And sometimes at the top of organizations, it becomes clear that when you don't have the right representation and you don't have the right peers and partners, that the other problem is actually, in that case, the way we were operating, the CEO was essentially the CIO, the CISO, because he really just didn't have everybody high functioning. We weren't high performing. And I see that still today. It's actually, I'm a CISO and I report into a C level as well, but it's not the CEO yet. And I still think that that's a major gap in the industry when it comes to how we need to think about security first, and how we're going to digitally transform as an industry, and how we're going to actually affect customer livelihood. So, I would just tell you, for me, there's so many things. Like I've started coding. I actually have, a degree now in security. I have spent a tremendous amount of time on this. And the thing that I actually took out of it, going from retail to becoming a CISO, is that the security industry didn't have metrics, and we had all these ILID metrics. And when I code, I actually have to go looking for libraries, and they're not actually all set up the right way. So I have a deep appreciation where I did not have that in the past. And I think it really has transformed me. Like if I wanted to go become a CEO now, because I have this security experience, because I have the DevOps experience, because I can code, I really think I could be an amazing digital CEO at this point, because I do understand how to bring all those things together and how to bring people together that represent these different constituencies. I still think, however, that there is one area that is lagging behind, and that is security. So, I would just tell you, I'm interested in talking to both of you today because I'm finding myself that the work that I'm doing, I'm putting a tremendous amount of effort into things like adversary resilience and adversary opportunities. And the metrics that I've been seeing are basically helping a lot to make our products better, but they're not actually solving the big problem, the big dilemma of how do we actually rationalize business level decisions at a CEO level. And so, my group has created this thing called Securability, which is a suite of metrics. And I'm finding that they are more important these days than anything else. They're extremely valuable in helping to not just, try to make everything perfect, because I still go back and I tell you, I still felt like we were trying to be too perfect in IT and security. I still hold to my beliefs in that period. I have a lot more empathy for how challenging it truly was. And I think that the balancing of these metrics is essential to digital transformation, to how we're going to move forward. And I've also gotten into Kubernetes and cloud native and Docker. And so you're imagining, like, I have really spent a decade, altering some of the things that I understood, because I was really coming out of brick and mortar and I did not truly understand. And at this point, as a CISO, I'm also being asked to do the IT work for my organization as well. So, and that seems to be a trend amongst my peers. I'm finding more and more that the CISO in an organization is critical to business decisions. And primarily, one reason is because, we all have customers these days, but adversaries are actually just customers you don't want. And so now when you really think about what you're trying to accomplish and you get oriented, it's a very different place. So hopefully that kind of helps you understand where I'm coming from these days.
So Sarah, I think, I saw something that you wrote in a blog or something, and you talked about adversarial opportunities and, adversary analysis. And as so that becomes the real true way of, like you said, these are their customers. They're just customers we don't want. So what does that look like? Because I think it's a really intriguing way to think about, our whole industry right now is just a mess in security. I mean, it's just a mess. There's no other way to describe it. And we're just trying to sort of fight this ongoing complexity through sort of traditional routes. And when I read that blog article by you about, and I thought, wow, that's completely a different way to think about security that I'm not sure a lot of people are thinking that way.
And John, right. I had never thought about that. I mean, when we had, when John was here before, I think one of the problems I really had was, he did do the journey from Dr. No to the, I'm going to shut off the internet. And then, he did come back and start to focus on behavioral elements and even some of the heuristics that I was talking to him about, which is that chaos makes events, right? And so, when you're in continual chaos, I think we know that we don't notice everything. And so when I heard you talk about attracting the kind of customers we want and maybe repelling in a lot of ways the customers we don't want, I thought that was maybe the first lucid use of personas that I'd ever actually heard in security that actually made sense to me, right? Because at the end of the day, that is really what this is about, right? And so I don't think we want to market unintentionally to people by the way our sites work that, they're welcome. Right. So that was awesome.
That is the challenge, right? Is we're all trying to do the right thing. And I think our regulatory bodies are setting up some of these frameworks for us to be successful. What I see, though, is an emphasis, an overemphasis even maybe, on everyone doing the same thing, everyone having the same level of controls. And unfortunately, I did get involved in a project early on. I won't say which of the standards that I worked on, but it has set a tone of minimalism for security in a way that actually may be affecting all of us. The notion that you're just going to try and get rid of things like CVEs or CVSS issues or CWEs, all these like acronyms. By the way, I have a 25-page paper of all the acronyms I had to learn along the way, because if you go from business to tech and you go from business to tech to security, it's like not an easy transition, I will tell you.
No. Acronym acronym. Wow, acronym is a whole other thing. Yeah, this is one of the biggest things I spend a lot of time with Dick with, is this was so frustrating to me, was explaining kind of that gap. And then, having him fly off into this whole thing of like, well, I don't want to know the acronyms. And I finally had to say to him, you have to be literate in this world, or else you have no business taking us where you want to take us, because we're going to run into a bridge embankment. Like, we're just going to do it, and I just, the literacy at all of our levels, especially the board, right? This was the thing I really was freaked out about. I love our board and they ask great questions, but they don't even know what questions to ask. I was getting pulled into other board advisory work that I do on the side around technology, and everybody's like, what should we be asking? And I said, ask yourself if you have any idea what they're talking about. Not do you understand the details, but do you understand generally how this fits into managing risk, right? Because I had to explain at one point, I remember explaining to John, hey, here's what it is that our business can succeed because we're more comfortable managing these risks than other people. We're better at it. Right. So I was, instead of all risk must die. Right. And I felt like, we were going to put everybody in a bubble. And, so that idea to me of minimum risks, bad, because I think we've become comfortable with, stuff that's just not enough. But then at the other end of the spectrum, I do worry. I went to, and we can talk about this a little bit, but, I know, Erik, we talked about this. I went to become trained as becoming an auditor, because I became an auditor because I was tired of everybody telling me what audit would want, what audit would do. And when auditors would darken my doors and they would talk about things, I was able to actually say, no, this is our business. This is the kind of risk it's acceptable here. This is how we make money. And we can show you why that's the case, right? And once I started to understand that really they were just checking to see that we were doing what we said we did and wanted proof, and also that we could manage the risk successfully, auditors didn't give a crap. And matter of fact, they began to rely on the controls that we were putting in because we did. And that's the big disconnect I find in the entire operations and development community. The lack of understanding that if you don't have management inspection, in other words, what is it that we have to have in place to make money, to do what we do every day? They understand it in the Army, they inspect barracks, right? So we don't do the kind of inspection of the environment before it blows up. We just seem to do like FEMA style, what happened with this natural disaster, or, NTSB, where they come in and, completely take every part of the airplane apart. There's so much wasted effort. And when I started to hear about kind of your ideas, I became really excited, because I think we have an opportunity to transform the way we see the problems. And I think that is largely what we're struggling with.
Yeah, I think, and I'll let Erik go next here, but I think one thing to crystallize on that is that I see a lot of these best practices and benchmarks and standards, and they're not a one size fits all, and they're being treated like they're a one size fits all. And the way we talk about risk is actually not correct. The way we need to talk about risk as an industry is around our businesses. It needs to be more specific to our business. Yeah. And being specific to our business, we need to take these standards, these compliance frameworks, and we need to apply them in the right way to our companies. But here's the trick that I think I've figured out is with an adversarial lens. And so it's not just taking 350 controls straight out of the book, get your little check mark and you're all good. It has to be what of those controls are going to move the needle for you, because we all have different adversaries. We all have different businesses. We attract different kinds of customers. The ones we want, we shouldn't be trying to chase away. And the issue is so much of security, so much of tech is still one size fits all, because trying to be more specific is costly. Now, the good news is we're getting better as an industry because of things like Kubernetes, because of cloud native, because we can start to create code that's actually more specific to business segments. But we also, and I think this is the part you and I picked up on around personas, adversary personas versus trying to specifically pick out an APT group or some other type of, whatever we want to call it, acronym, right? But I think it's really important for us to actually understand the intent and behavior of the folks that are showing up on our doorsteps, because if it was brick and mortar, we would have that understanding because a human would show up or some sort of thing would happen, right? Mm-hmm. And because these are digital and we're not really looking at it, we're not seeing it. And in many cases, that's the first problem. You got to solve for observability, monitoring, those types of things. But we're still seeing genericism. And I think the genericism is actually where the industry has to correct that. I think that some of the things, like we've applied things like red teaming. I've still heard that red teaming is things like tinkering. And, folks are still trying to figure out what it really means and what the value is. And if you apply, red teaming in the right way and you apply these metrics and you apply a little bit more rigor around how you think about adversary categories, then essentially you can also marry in things like GRC to it. You can start to get those frameworks and the testing to really up-level your resilience in your software. And I think that's the biggest epiphany aha moment, is that we are coming up on a forefront that I think some of what I've figured out, which is why I'm starting to think about, would I want to eventually become a CEO? Because I have this notion that, all these things are not just tinkering. There is a way to actually represent the value to the company now. There are ways for us to talk about it at the board level that are actually business meaningful. And so the language of our community across the board, to your point, yes. We've got to fix literacy. We've got to fix joint metrics. We have got to bring this notion to the forefront. And we actually have to transform as an industry as well. So my biggest epiphany over these 10 years has been deep empathy. I think also having children and getting married helped me tremendously as well. It will slow you down a little bit, right? But I do think that this is a big deal. And so, I would say, Erik, I am still in awe of some of the things that you are representing these days with things like automated controls and trying to figure out how we do attestations and manifests and things like that, because I do believe in it. I just think it has to be married.
That's the balance, right? I think, it's interesting, when I think about, like, you made this sort of the comment earlier, like, are some of our standards and bodies, are we actually cargo culting a template that's actually putting us in danger? And then, if you sort of listen to John Allspaw and Dr. Woods and they, Richard Cook, I think, is the person who originally created the above the line, below the line, right? Like, I don't know if you've ever seen that. You sort of, below the line is like, it's complex systems, like it changed immediately, right? And so this idea of like sort of a body or a standard is just sort of an any pattern to complex systems. Like, it's just like drift will happen. And so that's automatically, you have like, I don't know if it's 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 week, or 1 month, the vulnerabilities will expose themselves, and then, so you add that the fact that the standards themselves become this inertia. I was talking to somebody just recently about like maybe changing a different sort of identity solution, a more sort of Istio Envoy type identity solution. And their comment back was, how hard that would be to change to remove ping, like I don't even want to even, like, I pointed to Spiffy, right? And I said, hey, like, it started with the ooh, and then it went to and then again, I think the last thing is that like these are complex systems, so that that's why I love the approach of the adversary lens of that. And then so what I've been trying to do is, I think all of this is about a conversation of security differently, right? Which is, like, instead of just laying down the constructs of regulatory controls and, let's wait to the audit to find out what happens. A lot of the work I've been doing is like, how could we sort of make that less waterfallish and create that as sort of continuous, objective, digitally signed evidence in the things we want to happen with no humans. That's a part of the puzzle. But I think you add in, I think, we have some mutual friends that do chaos engineering and security, right? I think that's another place. Like, why don't you just start a container image with known vulnerabilities? Why don't you just open up a port that should have never gotten through the pipeline, through the configuration, whatever you're using? I guess we would say it would stack rocks, but, then I think I think security definitely starts with something like a better way to reduce toil and increase efficacy in the audit process. I think it starts with a more operational sort of break it to find out really how good are you? And then I think the ultimate is your approach of an adversarial lens of I'm just going to sort of come in as some red team, or sort of, and not sort of red team the way people think about it, like an active, sort of adversary. You are the adversary. And
you have to have a test plan, right? I think when we really talk about it, red team, those words, has got a mystique to it. It's got a mystery to it. And actually what you brought up is perfect, because chaos engineering and red teaming, what we're really saying is, we have a set of adversaries that we should know, right? The ones that we're like, hey, we really don't want this behavior in our environments. So we should be trying to repel it, to your point. To do that, we actually need to put in categorization of these personas. We need to figure out specifically how we want to make our software resilient. And then all the other things that we're trying to do, all the control patterns, all of the standards, all the frameworks, they should ladder into that. You should have adversary categories start you off. And developers should understand, if they know their customers, they should know their edge cases. They should know what they don't want in their system. And that's the beginning, right? Is they should be able to articulate it. Then they should be able to put observability into it. They should be able to measure it. And they need a metric like securability for them to be able to know when they build an opportunity and that somebody's going after. They should be able to know when there's dwell time of an adversary they don't want. They should be able to know how to exit, and they should be able to create takedown strategies associated with bad acts. And so what we're not doing is creating ease for that. The problem is that a developer is very busy trying to help customers and scale customer capability, which is their primary job. And if you think about it, that means that the security industry, the operations, the performance, all these ilities really do need to create better platforms, better capabilities. It all has to get integrated in. I can imagine a future where I'm going to be looking at a dashboard at some point, and it's not just going to have my customer segments. It's going to have my adversary segments with it too. I'm going to be able to look at my products in a way that will allow me to see how we're doing with onboarding customers and maintaining customers and the features they want, and exiting customers, quote, adversaries we don't want, because they're coming through the same door. And that's, I think, the biggest, aha moment for me as a non-security person who got into security and IT and became a CISO, is that this industry has really needed a bit of a shakeup. One, it's needed a way for us to actually all work together. And that, to me, has transformed into something we're all calling DevSecOps. But unfortunately, we're still doing the bare basic minimum because we just don't have the products and the capabilities yet that are going to really push us to that forefront of that Nirvana dashboard that allows us to have a business level conversation about how resilient our stuff is and how it's matching our intent of servicing customers. So the reason I'm in this line of business is because I believe that there is a place for our customers to be number one in our hearts, and that we're not using these weird techniques to ferret out, do we trust a customer first? We should always trust our customers. We should be able to exit people who don't represent customer behavior almost immediately. So that's my stick.
It's funny. Brent has been picking up on a lot of kind of, I think, your conceptual pieces and trying to telegraph them, in some cases rather harshly, to some of the teams, both in operations and in security. And I remember hearing him yell the other day. I worked a little bit on the street, and I would just say this was definitely a trading room voice. Very loud, very, very alpha, at a group of people that subnets are not personas. And he was going on and on and on. He goes, we care about what's in them, but we know that they're not real anyway. So he's like, stop obsessing over blocking all these subnets. He's like, we need to figure out what this behavior is that leads to these results. And then I just love the way you have kind of peeled a layer off for me of it's not just penetrations and exiting of data, exfiltration, but literally in your apps, in your things that are any, right? People are meant to access these things, right? And to me, that was the real kind of deluge of ideas starting to really come into me going, how do we instrument applications in such a way where behavioral elements are understood, right? Like you're talking about, how do we determine, but then also, forgive me, I just hate when people say, to a complex problem that we don't understand, let's just throw AI at it. And I was just sitting here going, right, and I'm just sitting here going, you don't understand. Computers are good at everything we're not, and we're good at everything that computers aren't. And judgment is something we do well. And patterns are something computers can do, but judgment is required sometimes to understand why there's patterns. And so I've just been sitting here going, these problems are complex adaptive system nature. They're not really ripe for automated, what I don't even call intelligence. I just call it automated, learning, right? Basically just an automated process. But the thing I guess I was really looking for was, how can we control more, right? I've been trying to have these more lucid conversations with, some of our C-level folks about what is the unique risk capability we have to manage. And then what is that intersection with what would need to happen to screw that up, or to give us bad data, or to threaten our core business. And, over and over, they were able to come up with ideas based around that. But just getting them into, say, we're good at not doing this, but getting this. They felt like they were dirty. Like they had to admit that we take risks. And as executives, they don't like to talk about this, right? Yeah. Especially when they know the board might hear. And so I'm sitting here going, how is this basically an understanding we all have as business people? But yet this is a conversation we are not excited to have about what risks are good risks that we take. And that's part of our business. And then how would these other things like you're talking about not just affect our goodwill or those kinds of things, but actually cause balance sheet problems because we have bad info and somebody figures out how we manage risk a little bit. Some of the things that we like our bias. And yeah. I thought, you're on some sort of a path that we're going to be able to have that conversation differently, not just about, how could they mess up, risks to operations, risk to all these different things, but also where are we not thinking about these folks getting a beachhead, Yeah. And that was so amazing to me. But Brent is like your biggest fan now. And he's really, really trying to take at the technical level what you're saying and turn it into something that engineers can go, oh yeah, that's right. IP addresses aren't people, right? Like, and I thought it was, so I'm seeing it trickle down is what I'm trying to say. And it's really, really neat. It's viral.
And we need to figure out how to build this beautiful language between all of us. That's big. The biggest aha moment I had is when I was listening to you when I was in retail ops, it was like, what are you saying? I don't even understand you. Like, you're like all these acronyms and I'm like, oh my goodness. And then when I got into the field and now all of a sudden I'm like, oh goodness, I'm now using these acronyms, but it's because it's part of the language of the trade. And I would say that people should be, like a developer should take a stint in a security role. They should take a stint in an ops role. We should get DevSecOps to become an actual job family across all of the industry. And then you can pick out like, hey, I love ops more than I love everything else, but I can do the other things. I actually have the language at my disposal. And that's really been at the heart of the things that I've been trying to do is we all really do have to have this notion that, we're not trying to just imply all of these controls because they're on some piece of paper. We have to be much more pragmatic. And I think that was my biggest problem at Parts is that, we really weren't being pragmatic about it. I want to see pragmatic security. I want to see us actually have rugged software. I want to be able to live the dream of one day actually looking at products and saying, I'm really pleasing customers. I'm really pleasing them and they understand the value of what we're doing and we're treating them like they are king and that they are also able to rely on and trust the security of our platforms. And to do that, to really look at that as a guiding light and a North Star, I think is different than to say your North Star is to get every little button and knob turned in a certain way. Yeah. And no offense, Erik, I think sometimes your stuff is turned into, quote, that language. But I would say, in talking to you, I think we're both very aligned on this. If we can mesh this notion of controls with adversaries, we've really got something that the industry can take advantage of.
Yeah, no, actually, an industry expert out there, this woman, Shannon Leitz, had given me some great advice about stop calling it automated governance and maybe call it modern governance for sort of those same reasons that it was even though I was trying to express it one way. But I think the interesting thing is, Bill, you sort of mentioned this, and I think this is the core of how we have to figure this out, is that balance. We come too much, me not being a security person, but really sort of studying all the players pretty heavily over the last 5 years or so. Like it just seems today, like these certain bodies, they just live and die by certain sort of, sort of NIST certain, or, FedRAMP, or all these things that like have to be, right? And what they don't take into account is that arbitration and that balance of risk, right? It's so either or. You got to have what you were saying, Bill, is the real world mandates. I don't know if I'll get Patrick in trouble. He's Patrick Behr, the famous founder of. He said to me, and he said it in sort of a meta, or a sort of a thought exercise, is maybe the greatest success story of security is where you spend zero money on security and you never get breached, right? That would never be a practical, or it would be a criminal approach. But the point being that like somewhere between that and then this sort of overloaded turn what you think everything that should be on, and you're still going to get breached anyway. Right. And I think that we haven't gotten that art yet. And that's not even true for security. We're still sort of trying to work through that art of, how much do we deliver from a capacity versus demand, even in our software delivery? Like, how do we sort of, how do we demand, like,
Kubernetes?
Yeah, right. What are the customer requests? Do we need all these customer requests? Like, do we have to turn every button on because marketing says, right? And so I think that's just a general sort of risk in what we do versus, how do we sort of arbitrate it, right? Is that,
Yeah, I think that modern governance concept seems like it's super the right thing for us. And I think it has to be controls married to an adversary perspective. Yeah. And that we really need to unite. The security industry still needs to get united itself. The DevSecOps movement is I would say early still in my perspective. I would say we're on a good track. A lot more software is coming out with the basic issues being taken care of. We're not seeing stuff that isn't being patched, and we have libraries now that are actually being taken care of, before they're actually published onto the production environment. But I think there's still things that are coming. Like, adversaries are smart folks, and they are really good at looking at rules and figuring out how to break them. And we've got to come up, like, chaos engineering seems awesome. If we could get more AI to actually leverage, you mentioned AI. I'm going to take one stroke on that one for a moment. AI has this whole notion of adversarial AI, which is actually that teams that are doing AI need to actually have training data sets to test against their AI to make sure it works. So essentially, we're building tools for adversaries to use against the AI from the very inception of having the AI. And that's an interesting concept. We had the
problem with AI. I'm sorry to interrupt here, but we had the problem with AI in both actually and in data science, where we had a bunch of Pythonistas that weren't even using any kind of source control or writing tests, right? And because that wasn't their background. Me being the chippy former ops guy, right? I go in there and I'm like, guys, how can you reproduce any of this when it fails? Like, where you lose data, right? And they're like, oh my gosh. And I was just saying, and then can you recreate a state? Like, can you say this is how I made that deduction, right? You can. And it's just a mess.
Well,
yeah, exactly. But there's maturity, and I think Erik was really kind of pointing this out too. There's this like kind of maturity curve, and what scares me, I think, is a lot of what you said, Sarah, where like we paint this like, as long as you hit, you're this tall, you can ride all the rides, and I'm like, no, it's not just your height. Right. It's, what your cognitive experience, there's a whole bunch of things. Right. And so, when I just could not fathom that, we've got this uneven growth all the time. We finally got security out of this mode where they think they're auditors. And I had to explain to them that their management inspection, like literally you are making sure that everything is okay for us to do business. And that when we're doing business, we're doing it the way we think we need to be doing it. And so and with whom, like you're saying, I think that's really a nice piece to that. But again, it's just like, I find that because things are cool or hot or whatever, we allow things in the door And we assume because it's software, development or some kind of a thing, that's new, that it's going to be okay. And the truth of the matter is that these ideas are great, but they have to kind of come into our set of constraints, our set of risks capability. And I don't think we have a process to bring things in before CEOs read about them in airplane magazines, right? Or,
Yeah, and then to talk about AI, just to take my only sort of crack again, whatever works, right?
Exactly.
The kitchen sink, okay, right? I'm not an anti-AI, right? I'm not an anti-automated governance. I'm not even anti, any sort of cyber data lakes, right? Whatever works. But one of the problems you have with AI, which is, it has a bias. The sort of the training for the AI basically is sort of the known things, right? I know there's some magic learning. But then I think about
Erik, it's where you use it.
Well, and then when I think about when I finally read the Equifax, sort of congressional sort of overview, it reminded me of the postmortem of FRS 447. For the longest time they couldn't figure out, was it pilot error, was it a storm, was it the air airspeed valves, and the answer was it was yes, it was everything. I looked at how they described all the things that led to the Equifax breach, and it wasn't just it wasn't patched. It was the IDS, the external IDSs were expired search for 18 months. There was some Conway Lawrism, and CISO reported to chief legal. I mean, I'm not going to go on and on and on, but the point is, AI is great.
One thing to add to that for one moment is that they were also compliant.
That's
all good.
That's right. They checked their audits actually passed, right? But the point is I'm not dissing on AI. I think it's a necessary tool for a lot of things we do.
Absolutely critical.
But there's a bias there that will never catch that incredibly sort of point in time. Even sort of the Capital One is a sense of there was a window open for an incredibly short amount of time where it happened, right? Depending on whose version. But the point is, I don't know that
we're just early on the AI journey. That's the challenge. We're early on. Digital transformation is early still. We operate in our heads like we're at some nirvana at this point. And to be honest with you, we're not. We're early, and we're gonna have a whole bunch of stuff that needs to evolve over time. And those are the opportunities. And I think that's why I look forward to this industry, is because, how can we help humans with all of the problems that they have is really why this is so passionate for me. Helping folks with things like prosperity and trying to actually help them to put food on the table. Those are all really critical to humanity evolving, and to also be able to bring them to a place where we're going to be able to do so much more. I'm super excited about things like going to Mars and some of the things that we could do to evolve as a species. And I think it's essential for us to understand that AI is a critical element that we need to have a guiding star on. What is it that we want out of AI? And the only way we're going to get it right is to test it and try it and to complain about it. We just need to get to a point where we complain a lot more about things so that we can get them better. I think being designed for delight oriented around customers and listening to them, truly listening, taking off the bias of your opinion and you think you know it all and you have the ego associated with it and your experience and all these things, and really sitting back and saying, what does this human need? And why is this system not working for them? And how do we actually bring those things together? And so I would go back and say, Erik, I would anticipate that for you, AI is critical for us to be able to do things like modern governance. We should be able to rationalize whether a control is going to be effective. I know that's how I'm thinking about it.
Yeah. I mean, my problem is, here's what I see a lot of people doing with AI. And this is what's really frustrating to me, especially in operations, which is basically being the downstream of a credible amount of variability that's completely needless. And saying, oh, let's point AI at this, right? We're going to have some sort of operational singularity, right? And to your point, the biases that we train these things with, and that's why I call it automated intelligence, because we give it a set of things to go off of, and it just automates its way through this stuff, trying. And so my notion is it will never AI will never eclipse what we actually already know, because we can't actually seed it to find things that we don't know. We can find patterns that we're not aware of. That's fine. But new knowledge is a real problem. And what I'm seeing people point at this stuff at, specifically inside of our organizations, is needless complexity and needless variation. And they're trying to use it as a way to almost inspect after the crap has been done. What do we do to make this okay, right? And I'm sitting here going, well, we know how to not produce this stuff. So why are we wasting any bandwidth trying to make sense out of stuff that we understand what the origin of it is? We just don't want to fix it, or we don't believe we can. And, it's just like your Istio conversation, John. Like, yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, we could actually take care of a lot of these things. Oh, that'll never happen. That's a lot of change. Right? And I'm going, if there's a problem, it's that idea, right? It is that idea that somehow we're here to do something other than continually change. The question is, what are we changing towards? Yeah. And I love what you're saying there. That makes so much sense.
And I think that's the issue, is what is the thought leadership that's going to help us evolve, right? What are those North Stars for the community? How are we talking about them? How are we uniting in these concepts? I still see so much difference in fractionalization and questioning whether it's this or that or the other thing. And frankly, I don't care what you call it, as long as we start to do it better. My belief set when we talk about risk, and we're talking about whether or not we got a control checked off the list, that's the wrong way to talk about risk. That's not a risk conversation. When we theoretically come up with ways in which something can break and we don't prove it out, that's actually also not effective. And so much of what we're actually talking about at the board level of these companies is some of those things. And I think that's what really has to transform and change. We need CEOs to understand why they have the CISO at the table. We need them to understand that without one, they are the CISO. And if they feel like they don't understand the acronyms and they don't understand why these capabilities are needed, then obviously for them, they're not actually getting it right? And that's the thing that we really need to solve for.
Consumer savviness right now is going through a major upgrade, right? And I don't think what you're going to continue to see is this bloodbath of firing CISOs when we have, issues, right? One of the things I think you're going to start seeing is some calls for the executives that build the organization to leave. Like, I actually think we will see CEOs fired over major security incidents in the future, because it's going to become a directed issue.
I think you might have that right if we don't have the right structure at the CEO's level. I would say
exactly.
When we basically say that security is not job one at an organization, that's where we get it wrong. We need to say it's job one. We need to treat it like it is part of the ecosystem and the business. We need to start there first. If a business doesn't understand what it's trying to attract, what its use cases are, what its acceptable use is, and then understand what its unacceptable use is and fund it appropriately and have the conversations at that level in the right way, then I think essentially all things underneath that are starting at a bar that's not going to be fully effective. And that's the real change. That's the real transformation that needs to happen that I'm seeing, in my role now. And, now that I've got IT and I'm a CISO, and you can imagine, I've been at the top of a company doing retail ops and really struggling to get the business effective in a digital transformation, and sitting right there and talking at the business level and not even having conversations about these things. Now I am, but I'm still struggling to get those things myself into the right places, because essentially right now, if you look across majority of the tech industry, if you look across most of the companies that are out there that are large, when you go to their website, when do you see a CISO? Very few, and that needs to change.
Yeah, that's actually, you're talking about, one of the things one of these questions I ask a lot that are really annoying to executives, which is you've cranked up some sort of, cliche burning platform, give it whatever it is, somebody's going to eat our lunch speeches about why we have to do what we're going to do. The fundamental thing is if you say the word transformation and you talk about it being complete, total, like business-wide, global, the question I always ask is, okay, so do you understand what that word means at the basic level? Not with digital. right? You're actually becoming something completely different than you were before, which begs the question, and I know that is a logical fallacy, but it does beg the question of how are you qualified now to manage the thing that you've never been before? And I just don't see enough humility, enough humble student thinking in these alpha type A's, a lot of them, to actually just say, you know what, you're right. I have to, I got to pull up to the belly up here and learn some stuff. And that being continual, I feel like a lot of the execs I work with right now feel like they did all the working out they needed to do in high school to be a great athlete. And I'm sitting here going, holy smokes, the amount of things. I mean, we've got to talk about reading more than like business pop self-help novels, right? In our groups, we've actually got to talk about substantive things, like, instead of just handing books back and forth that nobody reads. I think that can be great, and it could be a way to open up communications, but we're really not talking about what we don't know, what we're concerned about. What should I be learning together? You know what I mean? And I miss that when we were in Phoenix. It was very clear to our executive management team that we did not know what we were doing. and I think that informed the path that we had to take, both being pragmatic, right, but also like having fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders, right? I really felt like people took that serious. They were like, hey, this gig could be up if we screw up, and we don't feel like we're super qualified to do all this new stuff. So I thought that the togetherness part of that was huge. And so I guess I'm trying to say, I feel like maybe I missed that.
Yeah. The other thing to think about is, to represent all the facets of a business at that C level across the company. It also means that we actually, as an industry, have to invest in leadership skills to get people there. I look across our technology folks, I look across our security folks, I look across these poor folks, right? And they really do need to have a path to the top. And as an industry, we have got to figure out how to set up skills and an ability for people to have goals and to evolve them and to invest in them that's going to allow them to eventually take up those roles at the top of an organization and to be able to represent these differences across, so that the conversation of the business is all these things that are beautiful as a digital transformed organization. And I think we're still, as much as I complain about the security stuff not reporting into the CEO, let's be honest, go open those roles today and you're going to have a really hard time filling them, because we really are, as a world order right now, running short on security professionals. We haven't evolved to having DevSecOps yet. We don't have folks that have had the leadership training that they need to go from a technical role all the way up to the top of the business and being able to have business understanding. And I think some of the things that, you mentioned, Brent, I think that really what's interesting is to hear you talking about that, because the concepts and the ideas I'm bringing to life come from the top-down perspective of, let's focus on the adversaries. Let's really try to prioritize the right things and to move the needle. And the challenge is that if those things are being done really low in an organization, essentially, what gets valued is basically, like I said, the checklist, because that's what is in the airplane magazines. But I still think that there is going to be transformation. Like, I don't think that we could actually ask for everybody to add a CISO to the top level of their organization today. But that is the guiding light. That should be the nirvana. That should be what we expect as leaders.
So, actually, interesting thing Erik and I had to work on with some folks is that we had a lot of issues early on, noticing some interesting patterns. And one of the only ways execs could advance, or people could become executives in technology, was essentially to attract and glom reports, right? Right, and a lot of our we started to discover, our neurodiversity at this organization. And I'm so glad that we have, because I think one of the things that we found out is there's a lot of brilliant people that have no designs to manage people. They want to be the best engineers they can be. They want to be the best collaborators they can be. Some folks just aren't comfortable being around other people 24/7 and talking. We have all of these different views and lenses and capabilities in the org. And we saw our costs drop in the technology organization when we started allowing people to become distinguished engineers, to become the, I hate the term fellow, but you know what I'm talking about, that concept where we have these respected peer. And so like that allowed us to see this, not because we drove it, but because we embraced it. People stopped pushing for management jobs when they weren't really wanting them or didn't think that they were capable, but they saw that as their path, right? And so like you're saying, it's nice to be able to say, here's a clear path to get from where you want to go. And we do have this capability. And I think that is huge because so many of the people we talk to in tech are like, I just don't see in this organization where I go. 20 people have to die before I get that job.
I've heard so many times, and it's just terrible, right? Because they really want to, they want to be part of the organization. They want to stay in the organization for a very long time. Like, I got to tell you, I love my company. I can't imagine leaving my organization. And at the same time, it's really unclear for me, to your point, who has to die, right? And some of it because we just haven't figured out how to crack that glass ceiling of getting tech to the top of an organization to be part of the business. And that has to change. We have to get more CIOs, CTOs, and CISOs to the top of a company so that we can really be able to help customers in this digital way. And I think one thing to add on to that is, truthfully, if we're going to do that, the other piece of the puzzle is to what you were saying is we need to have ways for people to progress where they don't want to have to be people leaders. We do need the fellows in all organizations. We do need the folks that are going to be those technical geniuses, right? And I think one revolution that I'm seeing these days is something that is termed humanocracy. And if you haven't checked this out, it's absolutely amazing. And the other thing is OKRs. Measure what matters, which is really, I think, what kind of got deep into my brain. How do you measure the security thing? When you're trying to figure out how to be a CISO and look at a report that's meaningful and tell a story, how do you actually talk about these things, about what effort's going in and whether effort is actually the right thing? I still see to this day peers of mine really spending effort on, hey, this is what I want. I want this compliance checklist, and that's all I got to do, and check the box, and I'm good, and I'm out of here, right? And then they wonder why they end up with breaches because they really just haven't been mindful of what's evolving in the industry. And they aren't even talking to the right people. And they're getting, the thing that's really concerning is I think this is where Erik really kind of got my heart, is he focused pretty heavily on helping me to understand auditors. And I believe that where we also have to go as an industry is to help auditors to understand how to come into our business and truly understand our business and understand the controls we need and what we put in place, because their checklist approach to auditing our organizations is not a management assessment in the way that's going to help us to be able to understand the resilience of our organization, where we have holes and how we focus on these things. Those are the critical elements.
Here, I want to thank everybody. As you can see, we are having so much fun. We sort of ran over and ran out of time for Q&A. I guess we just we were having. Hopefully, you were having as much fun as we were, because we just
that was
we didn't just feel like stopping. In fact, I think we could have gone another hour if they would let us. But just as a note, because we don't have a Q&A, you can basically in the survey, you can basically in other comments. In the survey, you can basically ask questions, and we'll basically make a commitment to follow up. Hey, Shannon, Kevin, you want to say hi and bye to everybody?
Shannon?
Hi. It was really fun, and it was really fun playing the hardest character. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you on. That was great.
It was great. It was just great.
I had a blast too, and let you guys, if we want to keep continuing the conversation, hit us up on Twitter. Or any social media channel, but Twitter's great. I'm at Kevin Behr. Shannon, what's your Twitter handle?
At DevSecOps.
And well, that's great. And then what is yours, John? Bachagalupe?
Oh, mine's terrible, Bachagalupe. But yeah, and the other thing is, let us know if this thing's if you're liking this, right? We're loving it. So, but if you want,
how it could be better,
continue the series, we'd love to keep doing this. So, well, good. Cool. All right, bye everybody.
Thanks. We're out.
Bye.